everyone. So, as they say in Israel, Bruchim Habeim, I'm happy to welcome all of you to this webinar on career opportunities in Israel for college students. And we also at the end will be talking about internship opportunities in Israel. Summer internship opportunities in Israel at the end, after Allison finishes her presentation. So I first just want to say, as I say, hakara tov, really a true heartfelt thanks to Allison Levine Spicer, who is an employment advisor at Nefesh B'Nefesh. She has graciously done this before for us, so I know how well informed she is of the job market in Israel. So we're really fortunate to have her lead this webinar. And I also want to thank Josh Sussman, who is Senior Events Manager at the Marketing Division of Nefesh B'Nefesh, for helping us with the technicalities of organizing it and putting this webinar together. And finally, I just want to give a shout out to the Israel Club, who co-sponsored this event, particularly to Eliana Wagner, Michael Akavan, and Lior Savin, who actually put up the flyers and made the flyers and put up the flyers, the publicity for this event. So thank you all. And now, without further ado, I'm going to give over the floor to Allison.
Thanks, Naomi. It's wonderful to be back through the miracle of Zoom. I can be here in Israel and with you in New York as well. So I'm very happy to be here again. As Naomi mentioned, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A, not the chat box. It's just easier to keep track. I'm going to try to answer as many questions as possible. If you feel that I didn't answer your question or you have something super specific that you want to discuss further, please go ahead and reach out to me at employment@nvn.org.il. I'll put this up again at the end, and that reaches the whole employment team as well as myself, and we'll be happy to continue the conversation with you about planning your career in Israel. So let's jump in. All right, so first of all, I want everybody to give yourselves a pat on the back. I think this is a big deal, even just attending this webinar, whether or not you are committed to the idea of making Aliyah, or whether it's just something that you're thinking about, learning, planning, researching, asking questions, and attending webinars is a really great way to start taking steps towards making your dream of making Aliyah a reality. So everybody can give yourselves a little pat on the back there. All right, I do want to set some expectations. What are we going to cover today? We're going to talk about planning. What does planning look like for a YU student at this point in your life? What should you be doing? What can you be doing? We're going to talk a little bit about research, what sort of research you should be doing, what things you should be looking into, networking, why you should be networking at this stage in your career. We're going to talk about expectations in terms of salaries. We're going to look at timelines in terms of setting a plan and working towards your Aliyah. When should things fall into place, or when should you plan for things to fall into place? And we're going to talk a little bit about different careers. I saw already in the Q&A questions about different careers. We're going to jump into that a little bit as well. All right, so I want to draw your attention, first of all, to this idea that it's a better idea to plan and then make a decision. Am I going to make Aliyah? Am I not going to make Aliyah? Having done the planning to get to that point, it's a lot harder to not do any planning and then all of a sudden, oh my gosh, I really want to make Aliyah this year, this month, this week. It's a lot easier to have that option for yourself on the table if you've done some planning. Planning does not mean you're signing any commitment to get on the plane. But if Aliyah is something you're thinking about, and obviously it is because you're here in this workshop, then I encourage you to do some planning. Even if you're far away from making Aliyah, even if you don't know what you want to be when you grow up, even if you're not 100% sure that you want to make Aliyah. And a lot of what we are going to focus is how could you possibly make a good living in Israel? I'm sure that you've heard from other people or maybe some friends or relatives who've not been as, rah making Aliyah, that salaries are different and job opportunities are different. And it's something that you should be aware of. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. This is exactly what we just said. I'm sorry, we have a duplicate slide here. All right, research. Research is one of my favorite topics because I think that everybody can be researching what's interesting for them today. And next year, when you've changed career plans, you can be looking into something else. It doesn't matter if you're 1 year away from making Aliyah or 10 years away from making Aliyah. You could be researching what your life will look like in Israel. And I'm obviously focusing on a professional aspect here in this workshop. Now, I would guess that a lot of you follow news in Israel. I would guess that a lot of you follow current events, whether it's on Facebook or Twitter or even Instagram these days, whether it's on JPost or Jerusalem Press or Israel National News or Times of Israel. I bet a lot of you have your finger on the pulse on what's going on in Israel from a current events perspective. Now, I would encourage you to start following business news, professional news, what's going on about companies, what government decisions are affecting different fields. So that's the first thing. The first point I'd like to make in terms of researching: read the news, not just current events. Start adding to your repertoire of things that you check. What's going on in Israel? Other parts of the news media that deal a little bit more with professional life, careers, business, etc. The next piece I want to introduce is the idea of using job boards like developers use Amazon product reviews. Now, what do I mean by that? There was a great story one time on how developers would read through product reviews on Amazon. This was too big, this was too small, this was missing a USB port, this didn't have a long enough battery life. And based on the reviews, they would actually build new products. So I encourage you to use that same method. Look at the job boards, start at the end. A lot of people ask me about degrees and about what they should study and about what, I'm really thinking about doing this, or I want to do that. And I always encourage people to start at the end. Start with looking at the job market. Start with looking at the job boards to see what's out there. If you want to study mining because you love studying mining, and that's what really you're passionate about, that's wonderful. There's not a whole lot of a job market here in mining in Israel. That there just isn't. And you would learn that by starting with the job board and kind of working backwards. Look at what's out there. Look at what the opportunities are. Look at what interests you, and start to see what skills are in demand based on, reading the job descriptions. And that brings me to the third point about research. You have an opportunity you have a gift of time, all of you. I think nobody here on this workshop is making Aliyah next week. So you all have a gift of time to research what are the differences between the job requirements in the USA versus Israel. I saw a bunch of these questions on the Q&A comparing what it is to work as a psychologist in Israel versus the US, as a physical therapist in the US versus Israel. This is a really good time to start to do that kind of research on your own. You need to start understanding what degrees need to get recognized, what your licensing requirements are, and what is the difference in a day-to-day job. I'll give you a silly example: a physician. Okay, physician does medical school and then residency. Same thing in the States, same thing in Israel, basically. But your day-to-day work as a family doctor in America looks pretty different than it does in Israel. In America, if you're going to see the doctor, you check in with the receptionist, you sign in, you fill out some paperwork that you probably filled in last time, you wait for a while, then you meet with a med tech or a nurse, you give over your story again, then you wait some more, and then you see a doctor. The doctor, after he or she sees you, speaks into a dictaphone, records notes, and then that gets sent to one person to type and somebody else does medical billing. In Israel, most of that is all smushed into the doctor's job. The doctor swipes your card, types his or her own notes. Everything is very automated, if you will. There isn't a billing department, so to speak, and the doctor's typing their own notes. This is it's a silly example, but it's worth digging into your planned field of study so that you know what you're getting yourself into and what your day-to-day life would look like in Israel. Another way to learn more about your profession is on our website. You can go to the Nefesh B'Nefesh website, and we have a professions index, which goes through many professions in Israel. Anything that has to do with licensing or getting your degrees recognized, that'll all be spelled out very clearly on our website. In addition, there'll be information about what it means to work in that profession in Israel. And usually there's an interview with one or two people who work in that field. So this is also a really great resource. All right, let's talk about networking. The biggest secret of networking is actually to build your network before you even need it. You should be using this time to establish connections, establish relationships, make these introductions for your friends, and put yourself out there. I know it's a little bit scary, especially for us introverts. It's a stepping out of your comfort zone. But as many of you know, one of the biggest ways to get a job in Israel is through networking. And you actually want to start investing in your network now. I know it sounds funny, especially if you're not planning to make Aliyah for another 7 years. They're going to remember me. Yeah, people remember people. And with today's technology, email, LinkedIn, they're great ways to stay in touch. At the end of my workshop, Naomi's going to speak a little bit about internships in Israel. And I'll just say a word about that is that obviously the work experience is really valuable and being in Israel is phenomenal, but the networking that can come along with an internship is really truly worthwhile to invest in at this point. The connections and the opportunities that you'll have to meet people, that's really worth it. I encourage everybody to have a LinkedIn profile, even if you're in a field where you think most people are not on LinkedIn. Doesn't matter. It's a great way for people to connect with each other, and LinkedIn is actually very big in Israel. And something else that I wanted to put out there, you should have in your pocket some good networking questions. Hi, I'm thinking of making Aliyah in 6 years from now. Keep me in mind. I'll want a job. That's not a good way to connect with somebody. But having 2, 3, 5 good picking your brain questions. Why did you choose this career? What other options were you considering? What do you think was one of the biggest mistakes you made along the way? What do you think is going to be the biggest skill set that I should be focusing on for the next 5 years? Have some good networking questions in your pocket. All right, I know this is on a lot of your minds. How do you make a fortune in Israel? Everybody knows the punchline is you're supposed to bring a bigger fortune with you. But I'm here to tell you that maybe you don't need a fortune, because I think that people focus way too much on salary and not enough on budgeting. And salary is a piece of your budget. It's an important piece, but it is not the be all and end all of the story. As you know, salaries tend to be less in Israel. They do. But I can tell you personally that, day school education in America is a lot of money. And here I'm sending my kids to Jewish education and it's costing me next to nothing. So I'm happy to take the cut, if you will, on my salary because, it evens out. Why? Because it's not just about salary, it's about budget. I don't think that most people come to Israel because they're looking to, make, an exit and become a billionaire. People do that. People do very well in Israel. But I think that if your goal is first and foremost to have a successful Aliyah story, then let's remember that that is the goal, okay? And not making a fortune. Something that I encourage everybody to do is to really do a budget, a look at your own budget, even if you're not making Aliyah, because a lot of people come to me who have no concept of what their income and expenses look like today, living in Brooklyn, living in Teaneck without making Aliyah. So first of all, what do your expenses and income look like? What does your budget look like today? Where's your money really going? And you start to look at comparing your budget if you stay in the States, if you don't make Aliyah, versus what they would be in Israel. Now, keep in mind that Israel, it's a tiny place, but it's also a big place. If you want to rent a nice apartment in center of Tel Aviv, that's going to cost you several times more than the same apartment in Beersheba, or even on the outskirts of Jerusalem. So it's not a one size fits all in terms of where you live in Israel and what your budget looks like. We lived without a car for the first couple of years in Israel because we were able to, and it saved us a lot of money. But again, that came back to looking at what does our whole budget look like. These budget worksheets are available on our website. And you can also email me if you're having issues with that, or if you want a little bit more guidance in terms of building your budget for Israel. All right, so I saw a bunch of questions and I'm going to stop at the end to go through the questions a little bit more specifically, but I saw a bunch of questions asking about graduate school and do I need to go to graduate school and should I go to graduate school in Israel? There are pros and cons. That's the answer. The answer is there are pros and cons for going to graduate school in America. There are pros and cons for going to graduate school in Israel. And I would say really across the board, it boils down to this. Obviously, if you go to school in Israel, you start learning the system sooner. You start learning Hebrew sooner. Also, your degree, it's not a big deal to transfer a degree, but you don't need to deal with that if your degree is from Israel. I'd say that the bigger issues are learning Hebrew and learning the system. For example, if you're training to be a social worker and you're learning to be a social worker in the States, now all your social worker skills and knowledge transfers because that's your skill set on the one hand. On the other hand, all of your knowledge base of case studies and how the social services system works, all your knowledge base is from the United States, and you have to relearn the system in Israel. Is that a gap that you can close? 100%. Is it easier if you're in Israel? Yes. Is it easier if you start learning Hebrew earlier? Yes. Sometimes, finances are a factor. Graduate school cost in Israel versus graduate school in America. It depends on your program. Compare apples to apples. On the other side, a lot of people feel like, no, I have to finish school in America. I'm going to learn Hebrew. I'm going to work in Hebrew, but doing schooling in Hebrew, that's too much for me. And therefore I want to focus on, my graduate school and finishing all my studies here in the States. There are some programs in English in Israel. You're welcome to reach out to us at employment@nbn.org.il and we can explore those options with you. There's no one size fits all answer. Absolutely, everybody's situation is different. All right, timelines, and I wrote paperwork here. It is never too early to start getting your paperwork together, all right? Aliyah is bureaucracy. It's paperwork. It is. Sorry. You will have to have, long forms of your birth certificates and marriage certificates if that's applicable and all these different stuff. And you can just start collecting paperwork. The same goes for your paperwork relating to your schooling, transcripts, diplomas, etc. You can start to take a peek at what's waiting for you in terms of your profession and start to get your paperwork together. Can you deal with the paperwork after you make Aliyah? Yes, but it's so annoying. Deal with it now. Start to put a file aside of all your important paperwork. Hebrew is really important, and I can't stress that enough. Hebrew is a skill. Hebrew is important. Let's say you're in marketing, okay? Can you get a job in marketing 100% in English? Yes. But maybe your next job, you'll want to get a job that needs some Hebrew, or maybe there's an opportunity for you that comes up where you need to have at least a conversational or an intermediate level of Hebrew. Hebrew opens doors for you. Also socially, also personally, maybe you think, oh, I'm going to move to Ramat Beit Shemesh, where you could spend the entire day not hearing Hebrew. But maybe that ends up not being where you end up, or after a couple of years, you want to go move somewhere else. Hebrew opens doors. It's something that I think is really important, especially because I'd say most of the people on this webinar are more towards the beginning of their career and not towards the end of their career. If you're 65 and moving to Israel and you just want to work for a couple of years until you retire, so fine, so you don't learn Hebrew, all right? But if you're towards the beginning of your career, you want to have the most doors open for you. So Hebrew is not just chit-chatting with your neighbor, but it is also professional skill. When you're moving to a Hebrew-speaking company, when you're moving to a Hebrew-speaking country. All right, when do I apply for jobs? You should only be sending in your job application or reaching out to your networking contacts really like 1 to 2 months before you actually want to get a job. All right, and that requires all of your Aliyah paperwork to be in and approved, and you're booked on a flight, and you know you're going to be on a flight January 1st and you want to start working February 1st. At that point, you can send in your job applications. So not now. Believe it or not, there are people who send in job applications and they're not planning on moving for like 2 or 3 years. Just putting that out there. All right, I want to focus for 1 second on the last point on this slide. A lot of people come to me and say, listen, I'm going to find a job first, and then I'll move to Israel. I have to find a job first, and then I'll move to Israel. It's very hard to find a job before you make Aliyah. I've seen it happen. It absolutely happens. And as you get close to making Aliyah, I would encourage you to try. But if we come back to what is our goal, and our goal is making Aliyah, what happens if you get a job offer, you pick up your family, you move to Israel, and then 3 months later, the company folds? Now what? Or you say, it's very important for me to make Aliyah, but I'm only going to move if I get a job first. Then you're actually hurting yourself. You're actually putting yourself in a situation where you're never going to make Aliyah unless you get a job that comes through. Employers are hesitant to give a job offer to somebody who is not yet in Israel. So like I said, it happens, but don't build your Aliyah plan around getting a job first. All right, this is getting into where a lot of your questions are, and I'm going to stop here and start to go through some of your questions, but I think we touched upon a lot of it. It's doing research, it's looking at the job board, seeing what the job descriptions look like and what you can learn from the job descriptions and work backwards. Use the professions index online. Here's another one. I listed rabbi here. The concept of a pulpit rabbi, it sort of exists in Israel here and there, but it does not exist in Israel to the same degree at all. that you have in America. All right, so a couple of questions about internships. I'm going to leave that for Naomi at the end. But I will.
Allison, would you like me to read the questions or you want to scan them?
I think I'll skim them, but if
Okay.
you see anything that I miss that you'd like to throw at me, definitely let's do it that way, because I think I'm going to group a bunch of these questions together.
Yeah.
I will say something about internships, that it's a little bit of a foreign concept to Israeli employers. So I don't want to take away too much from Naomi talking at the end, but if you want to do an internship in Israel, do it through a program. All right. If you approach a company directly, they are just not going to know what to do with you. It's not like summer internship is not a thing in Israel. It just isn't. All right. Job opportunities for doctors. Yes, we need doctors. Yes, please come. Should we go to medical school in Israel or America? There was a bunch of questions like that. Pros and cons. If you go to medical school in America, you may walk out with a lot of debt unless somebody is funding your medical school. Medical school in Israel in Hebrew is a lot less expensive. It's also very hard to get into. If you are considering medical school and you're on the fence of whether to do it in the States or in Israel, definitely let's talk. Somebody's asking how Sackler Medical School works. So there are actually a few programs like Sackler. There are 3 programs like Sackler, where it is an American-based program located in Israel, similar to American medical school tuition. I think it's a little bit less, but it's around there. And it is recognized, they partner with an American institution. So you're actually getting an American recognized degree. You're getting yourself set up for the American residency lottery. I would say something to think about if you're thinking of doing any of these programs. Sackler, there's a Tel Aviv program also, and Ben-Gurion University.
Technion, Ben-Gurion.
Yeah, so the something to keep in mind is their guidelines. I don't want to say rules, but strong guidelines about where they want you to do your residency, whether or not they're open to you doing your residency in Israel or whether they want you to go back to the States for residency. I'd say that's an important thing to know about before you walk in. Okay, so let's see, genetic counseling. I'm not going to get into all the details of your questions, whoever asked about genetic counseling, because there's a lot of specific details, but I will do a little bit of a zoom out from that topic. Genetic counseling, like working in the media or acting or, I don't know, film, radio, it's a tiny market. I think that it's something to keep in mind with, obviously there's nothing in common with genetic counseling and working in film, but they're both tiny markets in Israel. If you have a hospital, you probably are only hiring 1 or 2 genetic counselors. You're hiring dozens of, if not more, nurses, dozens, if not hundreds of doctors and paramedical professionals. You're hiring probably 1 or 2 genetic counselors. So I'm not going to get into transferring your requirements, but something to think about is, what does your market size look like in terms of job opportunities? It is something to keep in mind. How easy is it going to be for you to find a job in Israel? How in demand is this job? You could be the most highly qualified, film producer and not be able to get a job. You could be the best sports lawyer in Israel. It's a tiny market here. Sports exists in Israel, yes. It's a tiny market. All right. Let's see. Is there a way to make Aliyah without going to the army if you're in the age range where army is usually mandatory? That's a really great question. So we actually have a whole division in Nefesh B'Nefesh dedicated to dealing with army issues. So if this is something that is on your mind, reach out to us. It is not a question I can answer in a general way because every case is looked at individually. Yeah, definitely reach out to us. Working remotely in Israel. I'd say in this day and age, in this corona continuing age, a lot of people are looking to work remotely, whether that's taking their job with them, or from get-go looking for a remote only job. There are a lot of jobs, like it could be based in Tel Aviv, but they never need you to come in. I will say something about this. There are a lot of American hours jobs out there that a lot of people think are really attractive. First of all, the dollar has fallen a lot. So any of these jobs making American salary, it's not the same money that it used to be. Something to keep in mind. Something else is your life in Israel is not just about work. And I would encourage you to think about how much impact your social interactions that you have in person have on you. What do I mean? Is if you work full-time remotely and sit in a room by yourself, you're missing out on a whole lot of social interactions that I think is really valuable. So maybe you do it for the first couple of years. I'm actually really in favor of coming with a job, even if it's remote, even if it's American hours, just to get yourself settled. First couple of years, first year or two, wonderful idea. But especially if you're young, you're single, you want to be able to go out, you want to be able to meet people, and you're working American hours, that's kind of stifling. And even if you're married with kids, whatever, it's hard when you're by yourself in a bubble and not meeting people. I can just speak from personal experience. My husband worked remotely for a long time for a company in Israel, but he just never went into the office. And only about 2 years ago did he switch to an in-person, real life job. And he's like, wow, I have work friends. I have this whole other world of interactions. And his Hebrew was all of a sudden getting better because he was using it, just chit chat more. This webinar was very focused on your professional life and career and employment opportunities, but life in Israel, but life really anywhere, is about more than just your job. So don't lock yourself into working remotely forever. That was a very long answer for a very short question. Is it a better path to jump right into Aliyah right after graduation and hope that you find a job there, or work for a few years in the US and try to get that job transferred to Israel, asking specifically for the tech field? So I'll answer that question for the tech field, but I'll also answer that question just in general. Is it a better path to jump right into Aliyah? Tech field is very heavily leaning on your skill set. So you could have all the degrees in the world, but if you've never worked in what you do, that's going to be looked down upon, and it's actually going to be a challenge for you to get a job. Internships. You need to have a current skill set, and you need to have experience in what you do. That's also a great way to build your resume. Put your skill set first and your education last. I'm not saying your education is not important, but Israeli employers are very, very into what do you do? What do you know how to do? What do you bring to the table? And to answer your first part of your question, I'd say it's never a bad time to make Aliyah. All right. It's never too late. It's never too early. It's never a bad time. It's always something that is workable. I've heard from Israelis that it is almost impossible to get a job in Israel in the therapies, OT, PT, and psychology. These are what I'm interested in. What is your opinion? That's interesting. Those jobs are decently in demand. However, you may not always easily get a full-time job. A lot of people who are OT, PT, speech therapy, psychology, a lot of times you'll end up having 2, sometimes 3 part-time jobs, or you'll have a part-time to full-time job and also see clients privately. Because, coming back to the issue of the pay difference between what you could be expecting to earn in the States versus what you could be expecting to earn in Israel. Excuse me. So a lot of people, balance that out a little bit, by juggling a few private clients on the side and also some sort of part to full-time job. They're definitely in demand fields. I would encourage you to think about where Hebrew fits into that for you. For example, if you're doing OT, PT, you need a much smaller set of, Hebrew words to get by in your day versus psychology. You really need near fluent Hebrew to work as a psychologist in Hebrew. Think about what Hebrew you would need to work as a photographer, as a pastry chef, as a physical therapist. Move here, don't move there, put that here, stretch, like it's a much limited set of talking in Hebrew than psychology, and that might also be part of what's holding some of your connections back from finding a job. Where do you recommend we do research? I definitely threw up a bunch of resources onto these slides. I'm happy to send resources to anybody who reaches out to me. There's so many resources on our website. You can just do a deep dive into the Nefesh B'Nefesh website, either by profession or just in general for planning your employment in Israel. Is it reasonable to come to Israel for a job without officially making Aliyah until you have that more established? Does that run into the same problem with employers? It's sticky. If you want to come to Israel and work, let's say, try it out, for a year or two, you have to get a work visa. You have to get a company that's going to agree to deal with the bureaucracy relating to getting you a work visa. I'm not going to be the person that says make Aliyah and then move back to the States. That's not what I'm here to say. But like, if your goal is to make Aliyah, then make that your goal, and do your research and do your planning and talk to people and work on making your Aliyah story as successful as possible. I'll give you a little piece of advice that the people who I see who are the most successful in Israel are the people who are both proactive and open-minded. And I think if you can work towards being proactive and open-minded, you're going to have a really good success story. Medical school and residency in Israel. So we touched upon medical school a little bit. Come talk to me. It is possible to do medical school in America and then move on to your residency phase in Israel. It is complicated, but it is doable. And if it is something that you're interested in, talk to me and I will put you in touch with somebody who's really an expert in that field. What about a more specific career like music therapy? I didn't see it on the NBN website. How would one go about that? So music therapy on the NBN website is actually very similar to art therapy. You can basically read everything about art therapy. There's an organization listed on that site for like music art therapies, and reach out to them specifically for information. If it's something that you're really, really passionate about and you want to talk to somebody, you can always, and this goes for all fields, you can email me and ask for a contact in that field, and I can see if I have somebody to put you in touch with. Please do not email me with 20 fields you're interested in, because I also don't want to overwhelm the people who've volunteered to be mentors. But if you have like 1 or 2 fields that you're interested in and you're having trouble on your own finding connections, reach out to me. Music therapy, very similar to OT, PT. It's hard to find a full-time job. You'll end up working at 3 schools and 1 clinic. Nutritionist, dietitian, same thing. Hard to find a full-time job. You're going to end up putting together a puzzle of a couple of different pieces.
Allison, can I just
absolutely
ask you a question? This was something that was a question that was sent in earlier. Someone wanted to know about the whole debate of physician assistant in Israel.
Right.
So could you just spend maybe just
absolutely
a second speaking about that?
All right, I'm going to try to do this in 90 seconds because I can talk
No,
about this
no,
for
I
like
don't
an
care.
hour.
I just don't want to overburden you. I just want to.
Absolutely. All right. So physician assistant, in a nutshell, anybody who's thinking about this can schedule time to chat with me. But in a nutshell, physician's assistants as a concept, it does exist in Israel. However, it is new. It is limited to hospital only. And it exists currently in only 3 fields. I believe, without looking it up, emergency medicine, pathology, and anesthesiology. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that those are the three. It's only hospital-based. And it's still new. Israeli employers are still kind of learning what to do with it. It is a very annoying field to transfer. It is a very annoying license to transfer. It is actually, you know, I would put it up there as the most annoying license to transfer. It is easier to transfer your medical license as a doctor than a physician's assistant. If you are not yet already a physician's assistant, I would encourage you to consider other options, or I would at least encourage you to spend time studying what it will be for you to transfer your credentials. If that's what you have your heart set on doing, I'm never going to be the person that stops you, but you should know what you're getting into. And you should be asking yourself why you want to be a physician's assistant. Is it just that I want to work in medicine? And is it I want to help people? There might be other areas that make more sense for you to focus in, you know, to fill that need. Physician's assistant, it exists, but it's limiting. I'll give you an example. Let's say you move out to an area that's far from a hospital, where the hospital's not hiring any physician's assistants right now. It's limiting. I'm not saying, you know, comparing physician's assistants to nurses, but for example, nurses also working in the medical field, work in hospitals, work in clinics, work in emergency clinics, work in private clinics. They work in well baby care centers. You know, really opportunities across the board, whereas physician's assistants are in hospitals and only these three fields. So know what you're getting yourself into if that's the path that you're going. But it exists. There are jobs as physician's assistants in Israel.
And one other person asked
Yeah.
about dentistry. What kind of field is that in Israel?
Yeah, so dentistry is definitely a field that's in demand. And anything medical related with licensing, I would love to talk to anybody who's interested in hearing a little bit more about the challenges or licensing, kind of like I gave physician's assistants in a nutshell. Dentistry is in demand. It's an in-demand field. I've heard here and there that some people have had trouble getting specialties recognized, meaning maybe they were, you know, an oral surgeon and they've gotten their dental license recognized, but may have run into other roadblocks with their subspecialty recognition. So if that's something that you're looking into, you should definitely try to speak to us. But you should also know that Nefesh B'Nefesh has a division that focuses on medical licensing, that we walk you through the whole process. It starts from information that's on our website, and we really advocate for you and help troubleshoot your specific situation with the Ministry of Health. And there's going to hopefully be an event in New Jersey at the end of March. We got official confirmation today. So stay tuned for that. It's really more geared towards people who are making Aliyah within the next couple of years, but maybe that is relevant for some of the people on this webinar to know about. Or you should know that it's a resource for you in the future as you get closer. There were a whole bunch of culinary options, questions on culinary options in Israel. I'd say that it's a fun field to work in, that the pay is not really great to start in. You know, it's really when you're owning your own business or working in a really high class place. Is it really more worthwhile? But a lot of people have found like a niche, you know, corner, like food trucks is slowly becoming a thing, or catering. Corona has really hurt the hospitality industry as a whole. So something like working as a chef in a restaurant has been an up and down job. Working in hotels has been up and down. So something like that, I might encourage you to have a solid business plan based on my 2 years experience with the, you know, global pandemics. All right, let's see. opportunities for mostly English-speaking middle school and high school teachers. English teachers very much in demand. I'd say just something about teaching in general. It is a low starting salary, but it climbs, and you get July and August off, which is awesome. And there are options. You can work in the public Israeli school system. There are semi-private schools. There are private schools. It's a natural move for a lot of people who want to, teach in English, or we're teaching something else. Maybe they want to learn some Hebrew, but they don't think that they're ever going to be super fluent. And it's a job that travels well throughout the country. Everywhere people are looking to hire teachers. Naomi, any questions that you see
Yes,
that I missed?
a student had earlier written in, does coming to Israel with American student debt present specific problems in making a successful Aliyah? And if so, are there things students can do while they're still in America to help make a smoother transition?
So I'd say keep in mind that just because you're moving to another country, you still need to pay that debt. Having a plan, don't say, oh, I'll move to Israel when I finish paying off my student debt, because that might take you another 20 years. Have a plan. I'd say that's it's a silly, way to put it, but it's true. Have a plan. I'm going to put X amount of money aside for savings each month, and I'm going to put Y amount aside for paying down debt. Or every time you get a tax return, a rebate from the US government, and you get a couple $1,000s back this year, put some of it aside for paying down your debt, because maybe you won't get that same tax return next year. Have a plan. Everything is remote. Everything is online these days, so it actually makes it really easy to keep up with bills. But I don't think that should be something that stops you, as long as it fits with your budget and you have a plan to pay off your debt.
And someone I think also asked, are there particular areas in business that are more in demand than other areas in business?
Particular areas in business, I would say business intersecting with technology is very in demand. Business development is in demand. I'd say towards the financial end is a little bit less. It's a smaller market. It's also geographically centered around the Tel Aviv area, so it's limiting if you want to go live in Sfat. But honestly, I'll zoom out with that question a little bit. Almost anything intersecting with technology is in demand. Biotech, education, tech, medical technology, and business and technology. That's definitely a field that's in demand and a growing field.
And accounting?
If we're talking about US accounting, there is always a demand for US CPAs who do tax. I'll put that out there. That is always in demand. And then if you do other accounting, that is also in demand, but you're usually going to have a decent level of Hebrew, because you're usually going to be integrated with another company. Whereas if you are a US CPA that does tax, you could be working in a totally English speaking company. There are many of us here, and we all need to do our taxes. And there are a whole lot of companies that cater to that clientele. There is an option to become an Israeli accountant. I haven't encountered so many people who've gone that route, but that route exists. And again, if you're towards the beginning of your career, I would always encourage you to put more options on the table and at least look into it. Even if you decide that that's something that you're not going to do, at least look into it.
And I see down here marketing, you like things you should know that I think are different in the field. Can you spend just a few minutes talking about that?
Sure. So I'd say that in Israel, you're going to be hired for your up to the moment skill sets in marketing, but also for your English. Here is a great example of a field where your English is a front and center skill, because chances are you're going to be hired by an Israeli company with an international facing market, and they need you to do the marketing. Everything is really moving towards digital marketing, although print marketing still exists, but really everything is moving towards digital marketing. It is a field that is easier to transition into. You don't necessarily need to have a degree in marketing to work in marketing. I would encourage, although a degree in marketing is perfectly fine and wonderful, but again, that comes back to what I said earlier. Look at the job boards. They'll usually want you to have a college degree because they expect you to have a certain level of writing and composition and understanding, how to put together sentences. But if you have the skill set that they're looking for, they're not going to care if your degree was in communications or was in psychology. It's more of the skill set that they're going to be looking for. It's a very in-demand field if you have the skill set for it.
And then the last one someone asked about in psychology, for someone majoring in psychology, in the United States, we have many different options of a graduate degree, either going for what's called a PsyD, which is a doctorate in psychology, or a PhD in psychology, which tends to be a little bit more research-based, or an MSW, where again, I think what the person's saying is they want to do some kind of therapy, but not occupational physical therapy, but psychotherapy.
Right.
So is there, I think the question was asked, is there a preferred degree to have, or maybe even in a different way, an easier degree to transfer over to in Israel?
Okay, so in terms of what in America we call psychotherapy, the only recognized degrees are really an MSW, being a licensed clinical social worker, or a clinical psychologist. That being said, you can still practice privately. There are a lot of degree programs or certificate programs in America, like a licensed marriage therapist or a licensed family therapist. Those are not degrees that are recognized in Israel, but that doesn't mean you can't work privately and have private clients. I'll say something else about working in that world is it's always in demand. It's always in demand, really, no matter where you go in the country. Social workers are in need, psychologists are in need. It is a field that requires really solid Hebrew. So you can do it. Like you can get there in terms of your Hebrew. But if you don't want to invest the time and the effort in working on your Hebrew, that might not be the best route for you. I'll say one other thing about social work. Is that it's a very rewarding field and comes in many different shapes and forms here in Israel, from the psychotherapy type of thing to working at a youth at risk center, working in employment consultations, and hospital-based, many different things, school. I couldn't even list everything, but I will say this is that there are social worker types of jobs out there without it being without there being a need for you to have the degree. What do I mean? You could be a counselor at a drug rehab center using all the skills of being a social worker, and they might not need you to have that social worker degree. You could be a family counselor at a program that helps you work on your budgeting. There are organizations here that do that, and you need to have social worker skills, but you might not need to have a social worker degree. So ask yourself, if you have done your research, if you know the types of jobs you want to be applying for, a graduate degree or a license is really important for a lot of the jobs out there. But for a good, number of jobs out there, the degree is not necessary, but the skill set is. So that's why I encourage you, work backwards, look at the job boards, look at the job descriptions, use the professions index on our website and work backwards. Do you need this degree? Other questions? Anything else that you saw? Guys, you're obviously welcome here. Let me just move the slide. Oh, we didn't really get into so much of the salaries. This is a really quick overview, and I'm really not going to spend too much time on it because this is a very simplified version, but feel free to email me. Keep in mind that salaries in Israel are calculated on a per month basis and not a per year basis. If you asked me how much does a nurse make annually, I couldn't even tell you that anymore because I really just think in terms of months, which I think makes a lot more sense because most people do a monthly budget and not an annual budget. I zoomed through it because it's not relevant to linger on. Feel free to email me. I'll send you 4 or 5 salary surveys. Do your own homework, do your research, circle back to me with questions.
So Allison, thank you so much. I know we didn't get to everyone's question. So that is why Allison put on the bottom employment at nbn.org.il. In case your specific question was not answered, feel free to ask that question. What I would do is, preface it by saying I was recently at a webinar that Allison Levine Spicer conducted a webinar on for YU students, and there wasn't enough time to get to all the questions. I have a particular question that was not answered, and I wondered if someone could get back to me and then ask your question. And then, as Allison's saying, I'm pretty sure that they will be responsive to you. Obviously, you have to give notice that there's a time difference, so just be aware of that. But I'm certain that someone will then be able to answer that question. Allison, I just had one other question for you. I know that there were some students who asked if this was going to be recorded. It is recorded, but I wondered if we can also have the slideshow, Allison.
Yeah, I can absolutely send you the slideshow as well. Absolutely.
Okay. So in case some students, I know that you're trying to listen and then you see slides presented. So we will try to have this up on our YouTube. We don't have a channel, but our YouTube page, so that students can actually look at the webinar and
you could
look at the slideshow.
You could definitely work on the details with that, and I'm happy to email you the slides, and you're welcome to forward them.
Right, and if anybody, yes, and if anybody has who attended this wants to see it, maybe that's something else you can ask for employment at nbn.org. So thank you so much for your insights. I am going to just spend a few minutes talking about internships in Israel. So as was alluded to by, as was alluded to before, internships in Israel is a foreign concept. So you should just know that. And even though I know a lot of you are thinking, well, wait a second, there are a lot of international companies in Israel. It's true. But I think one of the reasons internships is a foreign concept is that Israeli law also is very strict on how you can hire people, what you can hire them for. And so it's a legal issue as well as a cultural issue, let's say. So it's something that you really have to keep in mind. But having said that, what I just want you to be aware of, we have put together the Career Center, the Sheva Glaubach Center has put together a list of organized summer 2022 internships in Israel. Most of the internships are organized or sponsored by one of 2 agencies, either MASA or Onward Israel. There used to be a third one, Destination Israel, but I think since the pandemic, they've kind of played a lesser role and they don't really have anything for the summer. So what does this mean? It means that while there are internships in Israel, summer internships in Israel, you have to apply through these, what we call third-party vendors. And there's a positive and negative aspect to it, like Allison said, of lots of things in Israel. First of all, the positive thing is that you have someone there in Israel watching out for you. who's responsible to get you the internship. If there's an issue, then to speak with them about the internship, etc. The negative thing is the cost. So internships in Israel, instead of you generally don't get paid. Generally, I'm making, again, a general statement. And in fact, not only do you not get paid, but you have to pay the third party agency for getting you the internship, for getting you accommodations, etc. So it can really cost money that students may not be willing to spend. But we have all of this on this 2-page handout. We have organized programs in Israel. But just to give you a sense, so most of students at Yeshiva University, not all, I know, but most students at Yeshiva University have spent a year in Israel. And because they've spent a year in Israel, this is a technicality, that they're not generally eligible for financial assistance for these programs. If you have not, and there are some students, if you have never gone to Israel before for more than 3 months, okay, if you have not, then you can apply for financial assistance. And that obviously will make a big difference in getting the costs down. So just some of the names of the programs. So again, if I'm going to get a list of everybody who registered, and I'm going to send them this handout. But some of the programs, one of them is by Young Judea called Amirim, and they have internship specializations in all areas. There are 2 sessions, either a 1-month session this summer or a 2-month session. And again, it does cost money, and you will see when I send it to you. But again, the money is both for getting you the internship, having accommodations for you, doing programming, etc. Bar Ilan, for those of you interested in science research, I am happy to say that the Bar Ilan program will be happening this summer. And for students interested in research in psychology, life sciences, math, engineering, physics, or chemistry. And if you want to find out more about it, again, I've put down Dr. Harvey Babich, who is the Yeshiva University liaison with Bar Ilan University. For students interested in business, there is a fabulous, fabulous program called Birthright Israel Excel program. It is highly competitive. And one of the reasons it's also highly competitive is it is very, very reasonable in terms of cost. So you want to try to apply these programs as soon as possible, as the summer is fast approaching. And all of these, again, I say to apply as soon as possible, only because these programs are kind of based on American deadlines. So unlike Hebrew University, that also has a summer research deadline, summer research opportunity, where you can get 4 credits for it. Their deadline is not till May 2020. So anybody thinking about that, has time, only because it's based on an Israeli system. But these other ones, as you'll see, are really based on American systems, and that's why they have earlier deadlines. There are some, as I think Allison might have alluded to, there are certainly some multinational companies. However, again, they too have to follow Israeli law. However, having said that, there's a company like McKinsey and Company that has a business analyst internship where you have to apply on their website. And one of the placements is Israel, is Tel Aviv. So I mentioned before, Masa is one of the major sponsors, a third-party sponsor, and so is Onward Israel. And Onward Israel has a number of programs. I think 4 or 5 different programs. I'm not going to go into it. However, If it is possible to get funding from them, they're very reasonable. If, on the other hand, because you spent a year in Israel and funding is not possible, then it can be, again, the fee for the program can be more expensive than you anticipated. But all of these questions can be also directly, we put on the handout, the people that you can contact, so you can find out your specific incident. I mean, your specific situation, whether or not you're still eligible or you're not eligible. Our crowd also has a 6-week internship, generally it's with startups. For some students, there is something called J Internships, which is a specific program on Onward Israel, but they have, again, some, it's a more reasonable internship program. They have internships both in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, and again, they have in all different areas. But again, for J internship, I would highly recommend you applying as soon as possible. And then many of you are already aware of this, only because I know I've seen students who are interested in it. There's something, Torah Va'avoda, I think. It's summer in Jerusalem internships. It's a B'nai Akiva kind of run program. And this year, generally it's only been co-ed, but this year they opened up a women's only program. So again, that's in Jerusalem. It covers a wide variety of internship opportunities. And that also is more reasonable in terms of their prices. Again, you want to try to get this in as soon as possible. The early bird, as I say, registration is January 15th, even though they do accept applications on a rolling basis. For some of you who heard already, there's a group on campus called Tamid. Tamid is an international group, and it focuses on startups in Israel. And they actually have a summer fellowship. However, it's only open to Tamid members. So if you are a Tamid member, you can ask the president of Tamid here at YU how you can go about looking at the fellowships. And actually, I have to say a caveat with that. I'm sorry. The deadline for that actually has passed. But for those of you who are just sophomores and are thinking ahead, as Allison has tried to show you, planning ahead is important. So those of you who are planning ahead may want to get involved in Tamid next year and then early on be able to apply to the summer fellowship. There's another program, a MASA program called Top Israel Interns. Again, and a lot of these, I will say that sometimes it can be shocking to look at the price of some of these programs. However, I will say that their placements really are very reputable, and especially for students who may have high standards themselves. Many of the places that you do match you with are really highly recognizable names. So I just want to say that. And then there's something called Way More Israel, another program, and that is something that's sponsored by the Jerusalem Heritage House. And so you can, there's several requirements there that one has to meet. And finally, the Forum for Jewish Leadership. It's FJL, and that also is a more reasonable summer program. So last thing I'm going to say, there are additional, other than these formal programs, there are additional ways of trying to get a summer internship. Okay, one is some of the ways are exactly the ones that Allison has suggested for full-time jobs. One is go on LinkedIn and put your search in for summer internship Israel. So all of you, again, I highly advise all of you to develop a LinkedIn page and to then go on and use this, for searching for summer internships in Israel. Someone said also on YouTube, search internships in Israel. On Glassdoor, which is a website that focuses on jobs, search for internships in Israel. You can ask companies directly, although I will say I really tend to lean more with Allison, saying that I think it's going to be more challenging for you. Unless a company is like Google or Microsoft or IBM, where again, they have such visibility that that might be a possibility. And then there was something that was suggested, that you talk to local Israel Chamber of Commerces. There are different Chamber of Commerce in several cities in the United States and internationally. And we put this a link to them on this handout, and you can try to talk to them as well. And finally, I'm going to say a last thing, is there are some Israeli universities, like I said, Hebrew University, that does have a summer internship in science research for anybody interested. But you can also Google some other universities and see if they might have, many of them do have international programs, and some of them may have an internship program that is also open to international students. So we gave you, on this handout, we also have a list of those universities. And finally, the last thing I will say is that in the past, Yeshiva University has partnered up with Mass Challenge for students interested in business development internships or marketing internships. I'm not sure what this year looks like with Mass Challenge, but that is another option. And then finally, YUCL, Yeshiva University's Career Link. So I know in the past, and Allison, this might be, you may have been even in on it, but there were, in the past, Nefesh B'Nefesh has actually recruited a couple of our students for summer internships. Now, again, I don't know if that's changed. Allison, I don't know what the
I'll say that we also work through a program. We don't hire interns directly. We work through a program, and it changes year to year, whether it's, I don't want to misspeak, but Israel Adventures or all these different programs. We also work through a program. There's just a lot of logistics involved and visas involved, and getting you guys set up with a place to live. So we, just like most employers, prefer to work through an existing established program. But yeah,
so
we
now
hire
you hear
interns.
from an
We hire
employer's
interns.
point of view. Now you hear from the
Yeah,
employer's
exactly.
point of view why these third-party companies
Yeah,
are
it's just
valuable.
easier. Bureaucracy is a lot of fun for somebody else to deal with.
And then the last thing I would say, which is something that, again, Allison has stressed, even in terms of a full-time position, is network. You may have an uncle, or a cousin who might be able to kind of get you through the, the paperwork or the, what we call the bureaucracy. You might be able to do that, or someone might want to volunteer, especially students, let's say, in the healthcare fields or students in the social service fields. There may be an opportunity just to contact an organization that accepts volunteers and looking at volunteering instead of calling it an official internship. So again, those are maybe additional ways to kind of break through some of the very hard line rules and regulations. So I just want to urge all of you, we are going to get, as soon as we get your registration for this webinar, I'm going to send everyone on the webinar a list of these internship opportunities, and you can then decide what's good for you and what's not, and what works for you. So again, I just want to say thank you for everyone who attended. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Allison, and thank you, Josh, for setting this up. I want to say that, I always learn even though I go every year I learn something else. So thank you so much. And again, thank you. A big shout out to the Israel Club, Eliana Wagner, Michael Akven, and Lior Savin for helping getting out the word.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone else. Be
Bye,
well.
everyone.
Enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.